Order, order. Minister to move the adjournment.
I beg to move that the sitting be now adjourned.
The question is that the sitting be now adjourned. Mr. Tim Yeo.
Thank you and welcome to the Chair, Mr. Brady. It's a pleasure and indeed an honour to serve under the chairmanship of such a distinguished colleague, and this may be my last opportunity to say that in public. I begin by drawing attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests, and in particular my interests in the energy sector. I'm delighted to have secured this debate and grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for granting it. I'm sorry that despite valiant efforts we haven't got quite as many people here to take part as we had when the application was made. I also warmly welcome my honourable friend for Lancashire, I'm about to say West, Preston. I apologise, I made the same mistake last time my honourable friend was answering a debate here, but I'm delighted to see him, and I know he will give us a robust response to any points that are raised. Can I begin by stressing that my commitment to low-carbon energy goes back more than 20 years. When I served in the government of John Major as a minister at what was then the Department of the Environment, dealing, among other things, with climate change, a subject which in 1993 was very much less understood, in fact, very much less even talked about than it is today. If you raised it on a social occasion, people looked at you as though you were slightly strange. And it didn't take me long, though, at that time, to be absolutely convinced that climate change was occurring, that the scientific evidence even then was extremely powerful, and that the changes in the climate which we were observing were caused, at least in part, and in my view in substantial part, by the increased concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere of the last 200 years, which was the result of man-made activity, and particularly the Industrial Revolution. What was much less certain in the early 1990s, as I recall, was the actual scale of the problem. Today, the need for substantial cuts in greenhouse gas emissions is widely accepted, not universally, but widely. This year, as we approach the Paris Conference of Parties at the end of the year, I believe the attention of the whole world will increasingly be focused on how we can achieve a more rapid decarbonisation of our economies all around the world. Last November, there was the historic announcement jointly by the presidents, President Obama and President Xi of China in Beijing, when they jointly announced a commitment to cutting emissions. Those commitments would have been completely unthinkable even 3 years ago. For the US president to say what he said then, for the Chinese to say that yes, there would be a date not later than 2030 when emissions would peak, Chinese emissions would peak, simply could not have happened, even, as I say, as recently as 3 years ago. In my judgment and experience, if the Chinese say publicly something's going to happen not later than 2030, they already are absolutely certain it will happen well before 2030. And I warmly welcome the, seems to me, greater determination of the US administration to engage in this issue, which is, of course, still extremely controversial in parts of the United States. And here at home, this month, we've also had a historic announcement, in my view. The three leaders of the major parties have united in a public joint commitment to take continued action to tackle climate change. It's another historic moment. I don't recall a major political issue being addressed in quite the same way, with unanimity, just 2 months before an election. So I welcome both those very important political developments. But equally important as those political developments is the transformation in the attitude of business. 20 years ago, much of industry was reluctant to acknowledge the need to engage in finding solutions to climate change. They felt there was a threat to their business models by the demands for reduced dependence on fossil fuels. Today, by contrast, in many parts of the world, business leaders are actually ahead of policymakers in recognising both the urgency and the scale of the need to move away from business models which are dependent on fossil fuel consumption. So I want to begin by warmly congratulating the government. Firstly, for confirming the fourth carbon budget for the 2023-2027 period. It's a very challenging budget. It was set 4 years ago. It was then reviewed last year, and I think enormously to the credit of the coalition, they confirmed it. I'm sure there were parts of Whitehall which were arguing very strongly in private for a dilution of those quite challenging targets for that period. But the budget was confirmed. And I'd also like to warmly congratulate the European Union, not something which colleagues on my side of the House very frequently do, but their decision more recently to adopt for their 2020 target a cut of 40% in greenhouse gas emissions was at the upper end of aspirations and strongly, of course, supported by the UK. And it was an excellent decision. It was good for two reasons. Firstly, it is setting a challenging figure which will force businesses across the whole of the EU and consumers to think how they can help achieve it. But secondly, it's a rational target. By setting an overall target for a cut in emissions, you actually largely remove the need for any subsidiary targets. And I've always been concerned about the artificial imposition of targets for the proportion of energy from renewable sources. That is not actually the right way forward. It's up to individual member states to decide how much they want to do with renewables, how much with other technologies. So that was a good outcome by the European Union. Now, achieving those targets, the UK domestic target, which is, of course, enshrined in law in our case, and the EU target, will require, in particular, very substantial decarbonisation of the electricity generation industry. We know we have the technology which makes that possible. The question is whether we are willing to adopt it. It means, in effect, that a transformation must take place during the next 15 to 20 years in the energy industry. And because the investment cycle in the energy industry is one of the longest of any industry, we can't leave the decisions for another 5 or 10 years. What we decide to do in the next 2 or 3 years during this decade, before the end of this decade, will have a huge and very material impact on what happens later on. In effect, the decisions of the next 2 or 3 years will determine at what cost the decarbonisation of the UK electricity generation will be achieved. If we get the decisions wrong in the next 2 or 3 years, if we lock ourselves into too much dependence on fossil fuels, we will, in my view, certainly be forced into making urgent, emergency and very expensive changes in the late 2020s and early 2030s. So, how to decarbonise electricity generation is what this afternoon's debate is about. And I want to start with the nuclear industry. I warmly welcome the fact that there is, broadly speaking, a bipartisan political consensus that the UK needs to have a nuclear component in its energy industry. The latest figures from DEC show that even now, even with the shutdown of a couple of EDF's reactors, nuclear still provides roughly a fifth of our electricity, a very substantial component. And nuclear, as supporters like me constantly remind us, it provides reliable, baseload, low-carbon power. There was a slightly wasted decade, I think, when decisions about nuclear, I don't want to turn this into too partisan an occasion, but under the previous Labour government there was a period when nothing much happened for a while on nuclear, but the bullet has now been bitten, and the decision to go ahead, firstly with Hinkley Point, has been supported on all sides of the House, even by the Liberal Democrats, which is a welcome change of heart. Unfortunately, the implementation of the decision to go ahead at Hinkley Point is proving tortuously slow. I commend, therefore, the willingness of the government, in fact, more than willingness, they've been positively welcoming to the possibility of a foreign investor as the minority partner in Hinkley. I trust that the final investment decision on Hinkley won't be further much delayed. I hope the Minister may be able to give us an update on progress there, because a lot of us have been getting concerned. This is a project which has already slipped. The timetable has slipped very considerably. And it would be a huge relief, I think, to a great many people if we thought we actually are going to get this final investment decision signed off imminently. But of course, the future of nuclear isn't just about Hinkley. Hinkley is the first step, but there are other projects which are also within sight. And I believe this gives Britain a chance to lead a European nuclear renaissance. I think we have huge advantages in this country. The political consensus I've already referred to, the fact that our regulator is really probably best in class. It has universal respect around the world. One of the reasons why the accident at Fukushima 4 years ago did not derail progress on nuclear power in this country was because people have a trust in the Office of National Regulation, and the report that was produced by Mike Waitman in the wake of Fukushima reassured people that was not an accident which could occur here. The circumstances were not those which were capable of being reproduced here. That has helped to create in the UK a public opinion which is more supportive of nuclear power than in many other countries. And interestingly, those people who live closest to nuclear power stations are often those who are the most strong supporters. They recognise that this is a clean technology, it's a reliable technology, it's a safe technology, and it's also one that provides quite a decent number of well-paid jobs. The interest that other countries are showing in the UK market, I think, reflects those circumstances I've mentioned. That we've got interest now from Chinese, from South Koreans, from Japanese, from Americans, from Russians. They'd all like to be here in the UK nuclear market. I think some of them see this as UK as a good starting point for the rest of Europe. Many of them will feel that going through the GDA process, the generic design assessment process in the UK, and getting approved under that process is an imprimatur, a mark of approval which would be useful to their technologies in other markets. And Britain should welcome this interest. We should take advantage of it. There's something here which we can exploit. We can even perhaps use this to gain a bigger share of the supply chain with resulting benefits for our economy. Nuclear clearly ticks the security of supply box. It clearly also ticks the cutting carbon emission box. But the third aim of energy policy, which is about affordability, I think there's still some work that the nuclear industry has to do. The questions about cost are ones which are really work in progress. I'm confident there are ways of cutting the cost of nuclear. The nuclear industry, quite rightly, has imposed on it very demanding safety requirements. I may say safety requirements of a degree which, if applied to some other energy industries, would have an enormous impact. If the coal industry, for example, had ever had to cope with the safety demands made of the nuclear industry, it would have struggled to survive in the way that it has done. But we must be mindful of the importance of value for money. We are quite supportive very often in this country of first-of-a-kind technology. It's interesting because we have a great record and history of innovation and research. But there is a question mark about whether first-of-a-kind is actually going to be the cheapest technology. If nuclear is to roll out extensively, as I hope it will, if it is to continue to supply a significant proportion of UK electricity generation capacity, I think we have to consider whether technologies that have been tried and tested in other countries first, in a home market, may then be able to offer us... yes, of course.
That's a very important point there. I mean, Hinkley, of course, is going with technology that is yet to be proven. But in my constituency, the Hitachi project is actually reactors that have worked elsewhere and have been upgraded, and it's relatively new to this country, but it's gone through a very rigorous process. So the fact that we've got two different types, I think, bodes well for the future, because we can't put all our eggs in one nuclear basket, so to speak.
Well, I agree with the honourable gentleman, and I'm sure he may enlarge on that when he comes to speak in this debate, should he catch your eye, Mr. Brady. Fortunately, there doesn't appear to be overwhelming competition for that a little later on. But it is a very important point, and I believe in the debate about nuclear, we need to bring this out a bit now, because I welcome the fact there are competing technologies. I welcome the fact that they want to get started in the UK. But in deciding which ones we might go nap on, I think we need to focus on the value for money, and there will be an opportunity, perhaps, to choose between a number. And those that have been tried and tested elsewhere first may have a cost advantage, which we should not be afraid of identifying. Let me move on to renewables, where there has been excellent progress since 2010. In stimulating new investment in renewables, the regime established by the electricity market reform process and all the accompanying legislation, which some of us have laboured for many hours to try and improve, that regime is now one of the best in the world from the point of view of investors. And today's news about the CFD allocations confirms that there is lots of interest in investment in renewables here in the UK. I warmly welcome the success of the Contracts for Difference regime. There is, however, an aspect of this which is clearly topical and relates directly to my concerns about value for money. The strike prices that are announced today do remind us, I think much more clearly than the previously somewhat opaque ROC system ever made clear, certainly to the average layman, they do remind us of the relative costs of different renewable technologies. Of course, it's great news for consumers that the cost of solar is falling. The strike price for solar is now significantly lower than it has been in the past. The rapid and considerable fall in the cost of solar is, of course, partly a reflection of the enormous expansion of the solar industry in China, but that has got benefits, direct benefits for British consumers. I think it is now clear that solar can reach grid parity, even in this climate, before long. And I'm delighted also that today's announcement makes clear that a significant amount of new capacity is going to be provided by onshore wind. I'm aware that that is an extremely controversial technology, particularly amongst many of my honourable friends. But the truth is, we can see today that onshore wind, relatively speaking, offers good value for money. Of course, there are some places, perhaps many places, in which onshore wind turbines are simply unacceptable for environmental and other reasons. But I would regret very much if we turned our back as a matter of policy on onshore wind altogether. I think it would turn out to be an expensive mistake. Because even with prices for offshore wind falling, and I welcome, again, the strike prices announced today, even with those prices coming down, onshore wind remains a lot cheaper, substantially cheaper. And my anxiety about offshore wind is I don't see the potential for a similar huge fall in the cost that there was in the case of solar. A large part of the cost of offshore wind is in the installation process of anchoring a turbine in deep and rough waters, where there may be a limited number of days when the process can even be carried out, where the cost of the equipment that's needed on site is very high. I think that places a limit on the potential further reduction in the costs of offshore wind. I hope it'll come down somewhat. I'm sure it will come down somewhat. But I don't see a dramatic collapse in the cost. Yes, I will.
Great one, Jennifer, for giving way. And on that point, I mean, I obviously welcome the announcement today, particularly in relation to the Newton wind farm in the Forth. And I take his point about cost, but nevertheless, surely he would agree that it will only be by a substantial increase in the volume of offshore wind that there will be any possibility of the price falling. And I take his point about the construction issues, but even there are savings that can be made there as well by advances in technology. I think it would be wrong to give the impression that it's not going to be an important part of the package in the future, particularly given the obvious advantages that we do have because of our geographical situation.
Well, I accept the Honourable Gentleman's point. I mean, I'm not suggesting we should rule out offshore wind. I am suggesting we should be mindful of the fact that it requires, at the moment, a much bigger subsidy than some of the other renewable technologies, and that we need to be, I think, hard-headed about how much what proportion of our available resource we devote to it. I mean, Britain is, of course, the leader in offshore wind worldwide, and so we've already achieved a great deal. And interestingly, again, I mean, off, for example, Guangdong province in southeastern China, where actually there are some relatively shallow waters, so there's quite a big push now being made in offshore wind there as well, which may help the process of bringing the price down. So offshore wind will remain an important part, but I am concerned to make sure that we don't allocate too much of the resource available through the levy control framework to offshore wind. We had last year the announcement about the FID enabling contracts, announced I think in about April last year, which actually used up about half the available resource under the, just over half I think it was, resource under the levy control framework. A large chunk of that was allocated under contracts which were at higher prices than those today. And looking back, I think it's always easy with the benefit of hindsight, but looking back, I think that perhaps we, in our anxiety to get this process underway, may have gone a bit further than we really needed to at that early stage, and that we are locked into some relatively expensive contracts. Anyway, be that as it may, the benefits now of competition and of the continuing fall in prices, in costs rather, is reflected, I think, in today's strike prices. I urge the government in future, therefore, to be as technology blind as possible, leave the local objections to individual proposals, projects, to be resolved through the planning system, and to try and help the best value for money technologies continue to cut costs and to flourish. And in particular, I've already mentioned, I think solar will reach grid parity. I think onshore wind also has the potential to reach grid parity. And if that happens, and a local community is happy to see some turbines in its neighbourhood, why should they not be allowed to construct those? Moving on now to gas, which is not everyone's idea of a low-carbon technology, though, of course, compared with unabated coal, it certainly is a lower carbon technology. The problem for Britain now about gas is that our own reserves are running down, so we're importing a great deal of gas. Luckily, a lot of it from our friendly neighbour in the form of Norway, and we're not really dependent to any meaningful extent on Russian gas for our own consumption. But we are importing a lot of LNG. Now, interestingly, this came out in the debate we had on the infrastructure bill a few weeks ago. David Mackay's report in September 2013 pointed out that net greenhouse gas emissions from imported LNG are actually higher than those from shale gas extracted by the fracking process. So if we continue to use large amounts of imported LNG instead of actually exploiting what may be significant domestic reserves in the form of shale gas, using the fracking process, which my committee has reported on twice and regards as potentially a safe technology, if we continue to use large amounts of LNG, we are actually locking ourselves into a slightly higher emission pattern. I believe that no matter what, in the next 15 to 20 years, gas will remain an important part of our energy mix. I think it's completely unrealistic for people to assume we can get by without consuming a great deal of gas. So I believe we should now press on with exploiting our shale gas reserves. To do that, even to determine how great those reserves may be, we need to start drilling. And I regret the fact there appears to be continued delay, caused in part by local opposition, to embracing this opportunity. Britain could be the leader in Europe on shale gas. We could, in effect, if we get on with it now, we could write the European rulebook on shale gas. There would be benefits for contractors, for supply chain companies, and others. If we did that, there would be an economic advantage to the UK if we delay no further and press on with shale gas, as other countries would then follow our lead. They would overcome their current caution and follow us down the shale gas route. So I hope that's an opportunity which we won't miss. I think it's just as unrealistic to assume that we can do without lots of gas in the next 15 years as it is unrealistic to assume that if we close down all our nuclear power stations, that they can be replaced by low-carbon renewables. But of course, the lowest carbon energy of all is the energy which we don't use. And in this context, I want again to urge the government to promote demand-side response. There's still a great deal of misunderstanding about demand-side response. A lot of people think it actually means imposing power cuts on consumers without notice and against their will. It means nothing of the sort. Demand-side response today involves harnessing the latest technology to facilitate cuts, voluntary cuts in consumption at peak periods by consumers who are paid for their ability to switch off their power at very short notice. And the prize, if we actually embrace demand-side response, is enormous. It means we can cut the total capacity, electricity generating capacity, that has to be maintained at all. At the moment, we have to have high levels of capacity available for use, which may only be for a few days in the whole year. An incredibly wasteful arrangement. If we have a vibrant demand-side response sector, we will not have to have so much capacity. Every consumer will benefit from that, because every consumer at the moment is subsidising capacity which is scarcely ever used. Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting point there. And of course, underdeveloped is marine technology. And if we had tidal, then we'd be able to have greater control over that for different parts of the country. The tides producing different type of electricity. And we, on the Energy Select Committee, sort of looked at this, but not in enough detail. And I think the government needs to look seriously at developing not just offshore wind, but the marine technology of tide and wave.
I agree with the honourable member, and I'm glad that Britain is at least a world leader in research on some of these marine technologies, and I welcome the fact we're now, I believe, going to go ahead with experimental tidal lagoons as well in the West Country. The potential from these is enormous, but it would be greatly facilitated if we embraced more demand-side response. It would also, of course, be greatly enhanced if our research on storage was successful in finding cheaper ways of storing electricity. It's another very urgent and hitherto somewhat overlooked area. Yes.
I was just going to make that point before he made it himself, but as well as investment in advanced technologies and storage, there's also some very tried and tested technologies involved in storage which are not at the moment fully made use of. And would you agree with me that also needs to be ramped up by the government as well? Thank you.
The honourable member is quite right, and storage generally, and apart from the new technologies for storage generally has been, I think, underemphasised by successive governments. I think one of the problems is the mindset here. There's a sort of 20th century mindset, dating back to the old days of the Central Electricity Generating Board, where the overriding aim then was to make sure people never had a power cut. So you maintain vast amounts of surplus capacity at all times. The answer to every anxiety about whether we were going to be short of capacity was, let's build some more power stations. That was a 20th century answer. It is not the 21st century answer. The 21st century answer is, let's use this more efficiently. Let's make sure we can avoid the peaks in demand. It may well be that we do not need any net increase in total capacity ever again. And it's therefore, in my view, to put it no more strongly, unfortunate that the government's principal advisor on these decisions is a privately owned company whose profits are made for its shareholders by investing in more transmission capacity. The national grid, in my view, is seriously conflicted in this matter. Quite understandably, they have a regulated UK domestic business whose profits are directly increased if Ofgem signs off investment programmes involving more transmission. And that more transmission is needed, obviously, if you have more power stations. They will actually face a situation where their profits in the UK market could go down if we make a sufficient success of demand-side response. And we can't hide from this conflict. I don't in any way cast any aspersion on the integrity of the National Grid's management. They're doing an absolutely straightforward and proper job for their shareholders within the regulatory framework. But we mustn't allow that to have an influence on how we see the capacity market develop. The first round of auctions in the capacity market produced, I have to say, a pitiful allocation to demand-side responders. And I think it is extremely urgent. I know that the DEC is looking at this, and there's a review taking place about how the auction will work at the end of this year. It is very urgent that we should make sure the next auction has a much more level playing field so that demand-side responders are able to bid into this market and get a bigger share of it. It is a shaming outcome that the principal beneficiaries of the capacity market auction appear to be the most polluting technologies, diesel farms, coal-fired power stations. That is exactly what we hoped to avoid. And so the importance of the review of the capacity mechanism is very great. Allied to this, we should be making sure that as smart meters and other smart technology is rolled out, that incorporates mechanisms which allow time-of-use pricing to be introduced very widely in a way that consumers can understand, in a way that we do not in any way penalise poorer consumers. Because time-of-use pricing also, allied to the demand-side response contribution, has the capacity again to cut costs for consumers, but also to reduce the need for excessive amounts of capacity to be maintained at all times. Finally, let me just make a plug for the importance of the carbon price. The biggest factor in the long term in investment decisions favouring low carbon technology will be a significant carbon price. That might be brought about through carbon taxes. It might be brought about through emissions trading. Personally, I have a preference for the latter. A cap-and-trade system has the great merit of being predictable in terms of what total emissions will be. If there's a cap, there is a cap. If we relied entirely on carbon taxes, no one can be sure what the elasticity of the market's response to a particular carbon tax would be. I'm pleased that the UK government has been on the side of those arguing for faster and more radical reform of the European Union emissions trading system. But that also, I'm afraid, is work in progress. There's still a lot to be done to try and make sure that system is capable of driving a significant carbon price before 2020. A carbon price across the EU ETS is one which does not penalise any one country. Every country has to face the same imposition. So the people who fear that a higher carbon price in the form of a domestic carbon tax simply drives industry to other countries, they wouldn't have that fear if the price was driven through the EU ETS. I hope also that the British government will be among the leaders in promoting linkage between the EU ETS and the emerging emissions trading systems in other parts of the world. My committee published a report earlier this month on linking emissions trading systems, and we are encouraged, I would say even impressed, by the progress made over a very short space of time by the emissions trading systems in China. We are encouraged also by the implementation, the establishment of an emissions trading system in California, which is already linked to one of the Canadian provinces. Emissions trading is an idea which now has critical mass. There was a period 5 years ago where it looked to be faltering. We've now got, if China rolls out a national system in the period of the 13th five-year plan, as I'm confident it will, we'll be in a position where a third of the world's population will live in areas covered by emissions trading, where if emissions trading spreads in the US, as I think it will do, we'll find that more than half the world's GDP is from places where emissions trading is in operation. And so the goal, in my view, the wonderful goal of a global cap-and-trade system starts to come into view. And I hope that at the Paris COP meeting at the end of the year, that will be kept in mind. The latest report, the fifth assessment report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, proposed this concept of a maximum amount of greenhouse gas emissions that can safely be emitted if the world is to keep within the target of the average rise in temperature of no more than 2 degrees centigrade. If we have an idea of what the maximum amount of emissions can safely be, that leads naturally to the idea of a global cap-and-trade system with that maximum as the cap. And although this is not a dream that's going to be realised in the next 5 years, I think we should keep it in mind, because the danger is, again, we lock ourselves into systems which are incompatible with the achievement of that goal. So, in conclusion, Mr. Brady, I believe that if Britain decarbonises its electricity generation system, that will make our economy more competitive, not less competitive. because international concern over climate change will intensify, and I believe intensify quickly in the next few years. That will lead to a carbon price, a significant carbon price, either, as I say, from emissions trading or from carbon taxes. And that those countries, those industries, those companies, perhaps even those households who have taken a lead in decarbonising their economies, their business models, their patterns of consumption, will enjoy greater prosperity, not less prosperity. Decarbonising electricity also promotes the security of energy supply. It certainly accelerates the cut in greenhouse gas emissions. And so I hope that Britain will continue to be a leader in this process. And in the way it achieves that leadership, I hope it will keep clearly in mind the importance of getting the best value for money in each of the decisions that are made to achieve decarbonisation. Again, I emphasise, decisions we make today have a very long-term effect. I believe that the government can claim to be the greenest government ever for what it has done in the last 4.5 years, and also, importantly, in the ambitions it set out for the future. But the truth is, of course, that the benchmark by which the accolade of the greenest government ever is set is not a very demanding one, because no previous government could really claim to have been particularly green at all. The next 5 years, therefore, will be judged against a slightly more demanding benchmark, and I think successively in the future. I look forward very much to my honourable friend's reply, and I hope when he comes to speak, he will indicate that he and the government share my hopes for the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brady. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And it's also a pleasure to follow the chair of the Energy Select Committee, of which I'm a member, who I was very impressed, delivered a very competent speech, but equally impressed that he delivered it from a modern technology of an iPad. He is the moderniser of the Conservative Party in many ways. I'm also pleased that we have a quality front bench here on both sides of the House. A Minister and Shadow Minister who certainly know their brief, and also the Minister in particular who knows my area. So when I'm talking about a locality of my constituency, he is very familiar with. So I look forward very much to a knowledgeable wind-up by the Minister and by the Shadow Minister. I come to this debate very much against the background, similar background to the Chair of the Select Committee, who has just eloquently spoken about energy matters. The energy security, I think, is probably, with food security, an issue which successive governments have taken seriously and need to take even more seriously in the future. And in the Queen's speech, of the first Queen's speech of this Parliament, I indicated that there was two subjects that I was going to concentrate on in this Parliament. One was energy and energy security, and the other food famine and food security, because I think there'll be dominant features as we move forward. The climate change issue, again, I have very similarities to what the Honourable Member has just said. I have studied this for some time. The first job I ever had, Mr Brady, was a galley boy on an oil tanker just after the time of the Middle East crisis. And I remember then the debates about the oil sanctions in Israel and the conflict there and how that impacted on global. And we've learned nothing since. At that time, we were talking about being greater security and everything. But when we had a windfall of oil and gas, we more or less squandered it and didn't invest in some of the technologies that we are about to and have done in recent years. So I think it was a wasted opportunity. Where I do disagree with the Honourable Gentleman when he talked about this government being the greenest ever, I have to say that much of the delivery of this government, the consents were done by the previous government, and a lot of the hard work of the Climate Change Act and many other that we put in, the renewable obligations and the FITs and all that, was very much the work of a previous government. But there was a consensus, and I think that was important. A consensus was built between the main parties at the time so that we could deliver continuity of these long-term projects. And I know there has been issues. I mean, I can remember when I arrived in this House in 2001, we had energy review after energy review. And nuclear was the big issue that split the Labour government. It split the opposition. I can remember the now Prime Minister hugging huskies in the colder parts of the regions of the world and trying to embrace Greenpeace and being very anti-nuclear to the extent where he thought it would be the last resort. Now this is the flagship of the current government, and I'm very pleased of the change. And the Secretary of State for Energy is another convert to the cause, and again, I very much welcome him. I can remember debating with him when I first came into this House, and he was, not just against, but his party were never going to go down that road. And here we are moving on in the right direction, I think, and building a consensus. I very much think that we have a great potential of the low-carbon economy in terms of jobs, in terms of boosting our GDP, and in terms of being world leader in many of the technologies. And I'm also pleased that there is this common ground now for an energy mix. And I am unashamedly, and I say this in most energy debates, pro-nuclear, pro-renewable, and pro-energy efficiency. And I see absolutely no contradiction in holding those three views, because we need to have the base load that nuclear can provide, along with clean coal and gas. We also need the flexibility that renewables give us in many ways when, as the Honourable Gentleman mentioned about peak demand, that we're able to, and then we come down from that peak demand, we're able to switch some of our technologies off so that we have the right supply going through the grid transmission system. So we need to have that balance. And of course we need to have lesser use to curb emissions through energy efficiency measures. And I think there's a lot of progress been made in the last 10-15 years on this, and I very much welcome it. I am a member, as I indicated, of the Energy Select Committee, and I think in this Parliament we've made a very important contribution to shaping the debate on energy. We've had various inquiries into various sources, from marine technology to shale gas. And as the Chair indicated of the Select Committee, with regards to shale gas, we looked at it very early on. We encouraged the government to take this forward in 2011. I'm afraid its initial response was not very positive. And here we are again saying it's the flagship, it's the way forward. And, we are shaping debate in many ways. We've looked at prices, the affordability of energy for the future on consumers, domestic consumers, and indeed businesses as well. And we looked at the profits of companies, scrutinised and shone a light on that, and I think that's been positive. And also we've looked at the issues of fuel poverty, and I think we've done a very good job. All these have been topical, and all these have been interesting because the public understand the importance of it. And I think we can agree, all parties in this House, of the need for stability and certainty in energy policy, because that's what business wants, that's what the consumer wants, and that's what I think politicians need to do, is to shape a policy whereby we can look forward to offer that certainty for investors in the future, whatever technology that we're talking about. And I believe that we can benefit from creating a thriving low-carbon economy through energy generation. Low-carbon economy will go through a number of phases. Today, and importantly, we're talking about energy generation, but there's also the phase of surface transport, of cars and trains, which is, hugely important for the future. How we're going to carry goods and people across the United Kingdom, across Britain, efficiently in terms of not just speed and time, but also in energy efficiency, and how we'll need to move away from diesel, from petrol, to electricity. And that is a huge task ahead of us. We also need to look, importantly, at air and sea transport as well, and the built environment. So this is phase one, I think, of a long-term plan to decarbonise our economy. And from that, I think, will become important economic decisions which will bring benefits, as I've indicated. The debate during the last 5 or 6 years has been interesting, to say the least. And unfortunately, I think it's been hijacked by certain newspapers, the print media in particular, different wings of the print media. And that has shaped and coloured some of the political debate in this House. And I think that's unfortunate, because the consensus that I talked about between the previous government and this government when they were in opposition, and now the opposition while this government and coalition's in, has been good for giving that stability and certainty that is needed. And I think, that we tend to react, and it's easy to be anti something. And I come from a constituency which has nuclear energy, which has early onshore wind, which has potential for biomass, which I'll come to, and indeed marine technologies. And I get people writing into me that are anti each of those. It's very easy to be. But I think we've got to be sensible about this and have a balanced, mixed energy policy as we move forward. And we need to take the public with us, and we need to show leadership in this House, and indeed give the right signals to business and to the consumer. And energy security, as we build energy security, will build a better economy in terms of high-skilled jobs. And the constituency that I represent is an island, and we have run on the label an energy island, and we've done lots of things that have been proactive in the future. The nuclear power station is the core of it. It has been, we had a nuclear power station since 1971 operable. Before that, a huge construction phase, of which my father worked in. And he was very much in favour of nuclear power in those days, because he, at that time, in the 60s and 70s, was given the impression that we'd have cheap gas and oil, we'd have cheap nuclear energy. It'd be so cheap, they wouldn't, it'd be difficult to meter that was going to happen. That hasn't, of course, come to fruition. But we have had this stable baseload that nuclear has provided. And the nuclear, and I'll stick on nuclear for a few moments, has been, I think, important in terms of when we got Safe Generation, in terms of jobs, skills, and we were the world leader, and we've let that slip. And again, I slightly disagree with the timescales that the honourable member previously said about the last government doing nothing. I think that period of the 80s and 90s, there was very little done at all, and going into the noughties as well, because the privatisation was framed on gas and electricity, and nuclear was a difficult one for the government to sell off, and it was a lack of enthusiasm in reinvesting in it and updating the technologies. And because they were bespoke technologies with the Magnox and everything, it was very difficult to move forward. So there was a phase where there was very little investment. The planning system, as was previously said, was problematic as well. We have resolved many of those things. Again, a lot of the spade work was done in the previous government, and I applaud this government for taking it forward when we talk about large infrastructure, and the planning system that we have for these large things is a very good way forward. So on the island of Anglesey, the energy island, we have not just nuclear, but we have a plan for an eco-park, which at the core of that eco-park will be a biomass 300 megawatts generator. And the vast majority of that will be going to the national grid, and the excess from that will be used as a fish farm and for growing of plants, and it'll also have a distribution centre on it, and it'll be self-contained, and there's the opportunity there for local direct grid investment as well. So, there are exciting ideas coming from low-carbon energy development. The Horizon nuclear project going forward, Wilfa Newydd, or Wilfa B, is an exciting project. Investors from Hitachi have moved forward with that project, and I've been to the site very recently with the Shadow Secretary of State for Energy, and we visited it and the vastness of it and the 1,000 permanent jobs. But importantly, there'll be the indirect jobs as well, and the supply chain. And on the day that the Shadow Secretary of State and the Leader of the Opposition has been there, when he was Energy Secretary as well, this project started in 2008-09. And he visited it. We also visited the Energy Centre, where there's training and upskilling of young people. And to see apprentices, 17 and 20-year-olds ranging there, who are local people, who have the opportunity to use their skills in the energy sector, in the locality, bringing and keeping prosperity in that area, I think is something that we should add to this debate, because it is important for our economy, these young people. But not just in the skills of the nuclear sector, but they are transferable skills, engineering skills of high quality. And also in the construction phase of Wilfa Newydd, there is talk of some 6,000 to 8,000 construction jobs. Again, high-skilled jobs in many circumstances. And again, local opportunities for businesses and for individuals to work in the environment, and vocational skills. And I'm very pleased, and again, that this is cross-party now, that we're recognising, again, the importance of vocational skills have been on an equal parity with academic skills in the future. So the energy island concept is, as I say, more than just nuclear. It's biomass as well, but there's also opportunities for offshore wind. The Celtic Array has been shelved for now, but Centrica, we're talking again of huge investment. And it not only benefited the energy companies, the potential, but also the marine sector as well. In my constituency, we have an excellent company, Holyhead Boatyard, which runs tugs around the world, but also has moved into facilitating the offshore wind sector and has purpose-built boats across the world, across the globe. And their Turbine Transfer's skill base is, again, from apprentices to master mariners and in between top engineering jobs. They build the crafts in the United Kingdom and they maintain the offshore wind. So there's a huge potential for low-carbon energy sources like offshore wind to benefit the United Kingdom and the ports and in the maritime industries. And the local company has an international reputation, but it also employs people, as I say, in the locality who have the opportunity to travel as well. Now, solar, as the Honourable Gentleman mentioned, is again, I think, a success story for the United Kingdom, although many of the parts are brought in and assembled here. But it has been a huge success. And the controversial onshore wind, and again I remind the House what I said earlier, that Anglesey was an early pioneer of many of these early wind farms. I have to say I'm not a fan of onshore wind farms now, sheer scale of them. They're 4 or 5 times the size of the original ones on Anglesey, and I think we should be developing these offshore, not just because of aesthetics, how they are on the landscape, but I actually think the wind resource is better, and as developed technology in wind, they will actually be a greater benefit offshore as well. And I think, and I do agree, that we can get down to grid parity, as has been indicated in the future, if we invest in the long term on offshore wind. So the next part I think I wanted to do is the importance of research and development, which is, again, something that we have taken the lead in, and links with the energy industry and electricity generation and low carbon with colleges and with universities. And again, in my locality, the University of Bangor has a faculty on Anglesey, the School of Ocean Science, and that has been pioneering in climate change research, not just on the shores of the UK and Europe, but also in the South Atlantic. And it has been doing some excellent work there on climate change. So we can give career paths to individuals who can be working in the operation of electricity generation and low carbon, but also in research and development and in software technologies and all these things that I've seen this faculty using on Anglesey. So there's a great potential for construction jobs, for engineering jobs, for mechanical and security, catering and supplies in the area, are all these downstream jobs that help to build a more prosperous economy in areas where energy development is going forward. So I do think this is an important debate because the United Kingdom is leading in many of these, and if we have the long-term plan for the future, a proper long-term plan for the future when it comes to energy, and there is that consensus and there is that certainty, then I think we can benefit the GDP. I call Anglesey the energy island, and it's a concept that we're going forward with, but of course Britain is an island. And not only, and I feel that Anglesey can be a microcosm for the whole of Britain, and Britain can be a leader on the European continent. And as an island, we can be self-sufficient in new technology as it moves forward, but we can also be pioneers for the development of many of these technologies and show the way for the rest of Europe. So this debate is very important, and I do think that energy security will still be on the agenda for decades to come. And the decisions that have been made by the previous government, carried forward by this government, and I welcome many of the things that this government does, needs to move forward to give the stability that I talked about, to give the certainty so that investors from wherever they want to be, indigenous or foreign, can actually look to the United Kingdom and say, this is the place we want to invest. We want to invest in new technologies, in low-carbon technologies, so that we generate the electricity that the companies need and that the domestic consumer wants. Affordable prices for consumers, and also creating top-level, top-quality jobs so that we can be a world leader and the United Kingdom can move forward. So this debate today is not just a debate at the fag end of a zombie parliament. I think it is a reinstatement of the fact that we as a United Kingdom are forward-looking when it comes to climate change, we're forward-looking when it comes to low-carbon energy, and that we will create quality jobs, training, skills that is needed, that are transferable, that can make UK PLC and Anglesey Energy Island world leaders.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Brady, and a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I first congratulate the Right Honourable Gentleman for South Suffolk for securing this debate today. It's a shame actually that there aren't, as I think he reflected, more people here to take part in this debate. It brings to mind a sharp contrast with the debates we had on the closing stages of the infrastructure bill in the last few weeks, where there seemed to be very many people interested in one particular aspect as it applied to energy policy, but who aren't here today. And I think that, in a way, and from other parties as well that are represented in the House, some of the smaller parties, and I think that's a shame that they're not here to take part in this debate today, because I think in his wide-ranging contribution, the member for South Suffolk touched on a number of very important and significant issues, and apart from a number of slightly more partisan points that he made, there was actually quite a lot that I agree with, and he probably won't be surprised at that, because we've debated a number of these issues over the course of the last 5 years, and there is, as he reflected, a degree of consensus. And I think it's always important with consensus that we don't let that slip into complacency. But there are good reasons to seek a consensus, because what we're talking about in terms of energy investment and energy decisions are decisions which will last a lot longer than any of us will be likely to be in this House, and a lot longer than any government lasts. And they are long-term decisions often, and it's important that we seek to debate and discuss and scrutinise those with that in mind. I'm also pleased to see that the Honourable Member for Preston North and Wyre is in his place again. The Minister for Energy, the member for West Suffolk, isn't here. I think I may have upset him, because it seems whenever we have a debate in this chamber or a statutory instrument, it seems to be that the member for Preston North and Wyre is here in his place, and that is a good thing, because I think he is more than capable of being able to explain and discuss the government's position. And of course, the Energy Minister is a very busy and important man, and probably has very busy and important things to do elsewhere as well. But I think he would actually benefit sometimes from being in some of these debates, because they do, I think, help to illustrate the wide range of issues which come into his department's brief, and the range of issues that we seek to discuss. Now, the member for South Suffolk started talking about climate change and the need to tackle climate change, and touched on the statement from the three larger party leaders in the last week or so. And of course, it's important to remember that the reduction of emissions in terms of energy, as my honourable friend from Ennismond touched on, is only part of the challenge in terms of emissions. There are challenges in relation to transport and heating and industry as well. But that in energy supply and electricity, there is significant progress that can be made. And the member for South Suffolk and my honourable friend from Edinburgh North and Leith, in his earlier intervention, touched on the announcement today in relation to the outcome of the contract for difference auctions. And I would just reflect on that in the context of offshore wind, the member for South Suffolk referred to Britain being in the lead in terms of offshore wind. Actually, and it doesn't give me any great pleasure to say this particularly, but it's England that's in the lead in terms of offshore wind, because there's 20 times more installed capacity in English waters than there are in Scottish waters, despite sometimes the claims that are made. But there are a number of projects in Scotland which have been successful in what was being announced today, including, as was referred to, an offshore wind project, which I hope gives us in Scotland an opportunity to try to make some progress. And of course that is underpinned by the UK-wide system of support that we enjoy, which benefits Scotland hugely in terms of being able to develop renewable technologies, but it also benefits everybody in all parts of the UK for the power that is therefore supplied. Although the discussion in the last few days around the potential closure of Longannet coal-fired power station in Scotland does illustrate that we have an increasingly imbalanced energy supply in Scotland, and we have to be careful to ensure that we don't end up with a situation where, as is now the case, one day in 6, for at least part of one day in 6, we are now importing, or energy is transferring from England to Scotland to keep the lights on, particularly at times of high demand and when the wind isn't blowing. And members in the House may not have been where I was between Christmas and New Year, but it was very cold, there was no wind at all, and if it wasn't for power generated in other parts of the UK coming to Scotland, the lights may well have gone out, and that would have been a very significant and serious issue. So that's why I maintain the view that we need to have a balanced energy mix, and I think that's probably the view of everybody who's here taking part in this debate this afternoon, but that low carbon technologies there are a range of low carbon technologies. Sometimes people make the mistake of assuming that low carbon equals renewable. Now, renewables are a significant part of low carbon technology, but not the full suite. And we've had some discussion this afternoon in relation to nuclear, and I'll come on to say a few more words about that shortly. And we've also there are also other potential opportunities, other technologies, including carbon capture and storage, if it can be developed, that help to meet some of those emissions targets and as we renew our generation fleet. The member for South Suffolk also touched on the issues around the attitude of business and how refreshing it was that in the course of his time that he has been an advocate of low carbon technology, that the attitude of business seems to have changed, and I think that's something to be welcomed. He will recall, as I will, that during the course of the what is now the Energy Act, when we were discussing a number of issues, particularly around some longer-term targets for decarbonisation, that it wasn't something that was just advocated by NGOs with a particular interest. Actually, there were a lot of businesses who were also advocating the need for a 2030 decarbonisation target, and the cross-party amendment which he was part of proposing, which sadly didn't quite make the bill, but make the act, but was supported across by a number of people in his party and in other parties as well as in mine, that there was a need for a longer-term signal than we currently have, and that is a significant part of that. And in relation to the points around offshore wind, of course, the issues around cost and offshore wind are partly to do with scale, and that is partly to do with the opportunities there may well be for manufacturing and supply chain, which require a long-term signal to have that investment happen. And whilst I welcome obviously Siemens' investment in Hull, there could be much more of that, I think, if we had a much longer sense of direction and targets that then can give that certainty and that predictability which members have talked about, to be able to make those investments. He talked also about lowest cost decarbonisation. I tend to prefer best value decarbonisation, because I think there is a value in seeking to ensure that a number of technologies are developed and that we don't necessarily run the risk of missing out on some which can help, particularly in relation to renewables, which may be less intermittent than those which are currently commercially viable. And I think it's important that we continue, as my honourable friend from Innismon said, in relation to some of the research which is going on in his university and his constituency. But just in the last few months, I've seen at the University of Hull in relation to some of the software development to help in terms of cutting down costs without compromising safety, in terms of installing offshore wind, for example, in the Energy Research Centre at the University of Strathclyde under the leadership of Professor Jim MacDonald, and in Edinburgh the facility for testing marine technology, which are all good
examples of where we have great academic and research expertise which should help benefit the UK more widely in terms of the economic benefits which can come from the need, the inevitable and desirable need to move to a much lower carbon mix for our generation supply. The member for South Suffolk also made the point in relation to nuclear power and his celebrating of the fact of the broad consensus that there is in relation to new nuclear being part of that mix. I think he may have been slightly churlish in his comments in relation to party political support and where it was, because he will know that actually it was the Energy Minister, when he was Energy Minister, Brian Wilson, former member of this House, who began that process towards identifying sites and agreeing the process, which is important to get that right, to give the confidence that he spoke about ahead of and help to maintain that confidence through Fukushima, that process was established, and at a time when his party leader said nuclear was a last resort, and the Energy Secretary's party was implacably opposed to nuclear. So I'm glad we've got to a position now where there is support for new nuclear as a low-carbon base load technology within that lower carbon mix, and that's something which I hope continues into the future. But he was also right to make the points in relation to affordability and cost, because when the European Commission were able to find a significant cost savings in their scrutiny of the agreement between the government and EDF, I think that indicates the importance of ensuring that there is a proper eye kept on costs in the nuclear sector, not to compromise safety, to make sure things are done effectively and as affordably as possible, because if they don't, then we run the risk of then seeking to have a technology which seems very, very expensive compared to a number of alternatives, although they don't provide the same broad range of advantages, but will look on paper to be very much more expensive. And I think it's important that is something which the industry take their role in, as well as regulators and government as well, to ensure that that's done in the most efficient way possible. He also spoke in relation to a number of issues around the capacity mechanism, and I think it will be whoever is in government post-May to make, I think, some very important decisions in relation to how the next capacity market auction happens and the applicability. I still have some degree of doubt as to why existing nuclear power should actually be included within the capacity market, but I think the points he made in relation to demand-side management are well made. It seems a very small amount in the first round, and I think that's something which could and should be addressed for the future. And I welcome the fact that the government have moved in relation to interconnection as well, because I think that's an important other way of, and a potentially quite efficient way of being able to meet some of those objectives. He did touch on the issues in relation to gas and the amount of gas we need, and members here today will know that 80% of our heating comes from gas. We will continue to need gas for a significant period for heating, and we also will need gas as a source of peaking power capacity as well. So the debate around the sustainability of our gas supplies, where they come from, is an important one. And I note that the Committee on Climate Change have published some new information in relation to, following the debates on the infrastructure bill, about how potentially shale gas may be part of that mix and will meet in line with climate objectives. I think, though, it's important in relation to that wider debate on shale that we make sure that the regulation is properly robust and the monitoring comprehensive, to ensure there is public confidence before then anything takes place, and that also that it's done, any exploration or extraction is done within the context of those wider carbon commitments, and I think that's something which probably he agrees with as well. And I think that's the way in which that debate should be taken forward, although that I realise that is sometimes difficult, particularly as we get closer to a general election. My honourable friend from Innis Mon, who is a member of the Select Committee that the member for South Suffolk chairs, made a number of very important points. He again made the point about consensus, and I think that is important when we're dealing with long-term policy. As I said before, consider consensus rather than complacency, and I think it's right that government's policy are properly scrutinised, but we need to do that with an eye to the long-term objective that we want to meet. He touched on a number of different issues which the Select Committee have touched on in their recent work, which impact on the debate around low-carbon generation, low-carbon technology, and the importance of stability in terms of policy. As I said, important in the context of attracting investment and securing the maximum possible economic benefits. He also talked about the issues in his own area and the energy island of Anglesey, which I know that the Minister knows that part of the world very well, and I have been there in the past and know it's a very beautiful part of the world, but it's also, from what he said, obviously a place where there is a huge amount of creativity in coming up with some potentially really good opportunities in terms of energy, and it's not just about the nuclear power station, it's about a number of different aspects as well, and particularly that decentralised energy that he talked about in his contribution. The issues around investment and business certainty, I think, are very important. I think my honourable friend from Minister Monmouth certainly was on the committee of what was then the Energy Bill, which became the Energy Act, and he will recall that the head of energy finance at RBS gave oral evidence to the Bill Committee and said in that the importance of having that 2030 decarbonisation target was absolutely critical. He said, absolutely critical from the conversations I have with potential supply chain investors, because they point out it's difficult for them to take investment to their board if they really only have visibility of 3 or 4 years' worth of work. And that is really where we are, because we have visibility to 2020 in terms of levy control framework, but not beyond that. That's an important issue for, again, the government, the next government to properly address in terms of taking forward the levy control framework, both in terms of its structure and the amounts, but it's also important in terms of that longer-term decarbonisation target, which I think is very important and continues to be important. I will indeed, yep.
Just on that point, because it's something I omitted to say, the Honourable is absolutely right to draw attention to the importance of the long-term predictability of support. And I and my committee believe it would be helpful if the next government would commit to an annual rolling update of the levy control framework total. So there's always a period of 7 years. When it was set, it was 7 years ahead. If there was always a period of 7 years ahead, that would facilitate investment decisions and actually therefore tend slightly to reduce the cost of investment and therefore consumer prices.
Yeah, I think, thank you for the intervention. He makes a very important point in relation to the cost of risk and the cost of uncertainty. And I think whoever is in government in a few weeks' time needs to quite early look at the way in which the levy control framework will be taken forward. And as I said, both in the structure of the mechanism, the way it's, as well as the amounts, it's not just about the amount of money, it's about the way in which that's calibrated and the way in which it's taken forward. And I'm sure whoever the Energy Minister is in a few weeks, in 72 days, will or should have his committee's report in their in-tray to consider amongst those issues. As I said before, I touched on demand-side response, and I think the work that the Select Committee have done on that has been important, and the exchange of correspondence that the chair of the Select Committee had with the Energy Minister was interesting, and I think indicates, I hope, that there is still some opportunity for the government to take that more seriously going forwards, and I hope that will be the case, as I said, in relation to the capacity market for the next round of auctions, which will happen towards the end of this calendar year. The other technology which we haven't really touched on is carbon capture and storage. I don't think there is any serious modelling of our energy mix in 2030 that doesn't include a role for fossil fuel plants and industrial processes running carbon capture and storage. And I think carbon capture and storage is one of the key tools that we need to meet our decarbonisation agenda, but also do that in a way which helps to sustain some very important industrial processes which are important for our wider manufacturing base as well, and we don't just offshore that activity. But it's also an opportunity that I think is sometimes overlooked, both in terms of the potential benefits in terms of the cost saving to meeting carbon targets. Members will be aware that the Energy Technology Institute estimate that deploying CCS could reduce the cost of meeting UK carbon targets by £30 to £40 billion, or up to 1% of GDP by 2050, is at the end of a very important and significant piece of work. But it's also an area where we have a degree of academic and expert knowledge in the UK, and we know there's lots of work going on in places such as in Edinburgh. We know there's the 2 projects which are currently undergoing their FEED studies. I think it's important that in relation to taking forward the tools and the mechanisms for low carbon investment, that the contracts for difference are tweaked in terms of as they need to be appropriate for CCS development into the future, because it would be, I think, remiss of us to have 2 exemplar projects that are funded through the competition and then for nothing else to come behind that. And the key to that is making sure that the contract for difference properly is applicable to CCS, which is different in the structure of that investment than either new nuclear or many renewable technologies. And I think that that's something where it would be good for the government to, and again, whoever is in the government in a few weeks' time, to be very clear about their ambition for CCS, and also to seek to unblock some of the issues which have caused some of the delay in progress in relation to CCS. Now, I'm conscious that in this debate there has been a lot of talk about consensus, and the consensus about the policy tools for incentivising low carbon investments. That hasn't, unfortunately, prevented a bit of a fraying in the consensus on the need for such investment in the first place in some of the debates that we've had in this House over the course of the last 5 years. My sense is, only having been here for 5 years, that consensus has deteriorated amongst some members of this House. I think it's right that the costs of decarbonisation are properly scrutinised. I think it's right that people carefully consider the impact, potential impact of different technologies in different places. But I think it's something which we should all resolve for the future and beyond the election, for those of us that might be here, that we need to ensure that that consensus is properly wedded again, so that we can make sure that we achieve what we need to achieve in terms of both renewing our generation supply and doing so in the lowest carbon way possible, and in a way that benefits the wider economy in the UK. And I hope that's something which, regardless of political and party difference on other issues, is something that could be taken forward by the new Parliament, because it's far too important for it not to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Brady, and I'm delighted to serve today with the chairmanship, and I would like to start by paying tribute to my honourable friend, the member for South Suffolk. I think, I'm not sure if this will be the last time that we obviously debate and listen to his contributions, but I wanted to pay tribute for the work he has done for his constituents, for his party and serving the government over the years, and also to the committee. I think the DEC committee, or the Environmental Committee, has done an amazing job, not only in building that consensus that the honourable member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West has said, but in actually demonstrating to someone like myself that you don't have to live in a teepee to be green. You don't have to switch off the lights and go backwards. That to roll out a proper, successful, renewable-based energy policy, you have to not only understand targets for carbon reduction and the pressure of global warming, but you also have to actually understand the real world as it is. You have to understand finance, investment, risk, and technologies. And I think his chairmanship has done a tremendous job in bringing along both sceptic and enthusiast on the policy of green renewables and an energy policy that has satisfied many of those historical splits across the parties that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years. And I think ministers could do a lot more listening to select committees, especially select committees like his own, that has genuinely helped policymakers and I think brought together the main parties in coming to a proper grown-up solution for providing energy security and meeting our carbon reduction targets. It's refreshing, I have to say, when, like the rest of us, we have spent time in other sectors of government and Justice Department, whatever, where constant party politics goes on or disagreement is often more important than consensus. And I really want to pay tribute to his work, and I think he will be missed. And certainly the sensible way the reports are presented to the government will also, I think, be missed. And hopefully there is only 19 days left sitting of this Parliament, and I think that is a rather scary number for all of us. And I noticed the kind comments from the member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West. I'm not sure who will be the Energy Minister in 70 days' time. He will certainly make a fine Energy Minister if he is successful. I can't wish him that success, of course I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't want Russell Brand sitting as the Energy Minister in his place, or even Alex Salmond. And I think, therefore, what I would certainly say is I think we are all in a good place, the main political parties, in grown-up politics towards a proper energy policy. And I think it is important to note that some of the most vocal opponents in the infrastructure bill, the Scottish Nationalist Party, have failed to turn up in today's debate. And no doubt they're probably posturing on some other subject this week. They're not even here to claim credit for some of the successful CFD contracts that have been offered today. And I think we shouldn't forget that we are only going to solve Britain's energy crisis as Britain. We're only going to keep the lights on as Britain, not as separate countries, focusing on what divides us rather than what unites us. And I think today is quite good timing for us because, of course, the CFD auction results have been published where we have offered contracts, haven't all been, obviously been accepted yet, to up to 27 people that bid. And I think the good news from the CFD auctions is it's shown a number of things. It showed that competition has worked. It showed that our focus on trying to make sure we provide value for money for the bill payer and increasing energy generation has proved a good result. If I take the administrative strike price for solar, the actual auction price that came in was 58% less than if it was left at the administration price. It's 18% less if it was offshore and 17% less if it was offshore. And the value for money that represents is we've found help lever in £45 billion of investment between 2010 and 2013 into that energy market. I'm always trying to explain to people in different sectors, there is only so much money in this world chasing so much investment. We have to make investment attractive to money or it will go elsewhere. Not just domestically, it will go elsewhere internationally. And I think the government and the last government have done a good job in recognising that we have to create the conditions to get investment into some areas that sometimes are high risk or maturing technology. And I think the CFD process has been a real success. And let's remember what the aim is. It's to reduce carbon emissions. And as a result of the auction results today, what we've seen is there'll be 4 million fewer tonnes of CO2 emissions per year emitted as a result of this auction. No one can say that is a bad result. That is on the right path to meeting our aim of trying to reduce carbon emissions. And I think at the same time, what we've shown is that by seeking a sort of stable framework, you will find people will want to come forward and will want to share the risk at first. But at the same time, we'll see a reduction overall in the cost of production over that period. And I hope that the next time, by the end of the first 15 years or whatever the timescale, we'll see that the actual production costs of many of these generators even less. And I hope that the government of the day is always attuned to when a technology moves from maturing to mature, when it needs to incentivise newer technologies further down the path and maybe sometimes let go of much more mature technologies that have run its course for very many years. And I'd like to make the point again, 11 of the 27 of these projects are in Scotland. Now, I think that is a good news story for Scotland, but I also want to pay tribute to the members of the Scottish Labour Party who have worked very hard to lobby on behalf of the Scottish renewable industry and indeed on behalf of some of their constituents or neighbouring constituents, because this wouldn't have been done if we were two separate countries. This would not have happened in the easy way which all our bill payers will be helping to share the burden of electricity generation. And as the Shadow Front Minister said, when there wasn't much wind blowing in parts of Scotland or when it had to rely on our market in England, it was just a matter of formality. There was no artificial barrier. And I think people who are attracted by the Scottish nationalists or the agenda of separation should remember that they will fundamentally undermine and damage Britain's ability to provide electricity for all of its citizens all over the Isles that we all are part of. And I think that is something to take fully on board. We think the CFD auction will result in savings on average of £41 per family bill annually as a result of what we've seen in the competitive drive to reduce the cost or the strike price. And I think that's been a really good thing. And in response to the Honourable Member for Innismon, he's right. I love Anglesey. I can look out from where we go on holiday, the window, and see what used to be the tower of Rio Tinto and the red light shining. And I am very happy to, and so is the government, to work to make sure that the next round of CFDs that come along, that biomass and any barriers to biomass, either help in reducing risk for biomass investment, are addressed, and that we all work together to ensure that perhaps in the next round we can make sure that biomass has a better showing than it has at the moment. Because I would like to see, from a personal point of view, that a success. I know how important to the island of Anglesey energy is, and the pragmatic approach it takes. I think it would be good news for Holyhead if that could eventually be successful, and I'm always happy to personally help them together, I think, to make sure that biomass is embraced. And then on the subject of the capacity market, because energy security, securing our energy security, is of course incredibly important. It's all very well encouraging generation, but if the lights go out and we haven't worked together to make sure there is always some capacity, then it's almost for nothing. And I think it's been good that that auction has completed recently. We've secured 49.3 gigawatts at a clearing price of £19.40 per kilowatt 2018. And I think that's good news as well. So consumers and the public can be assured that alongside our commitment to develop renewables, we have also secured, hopefully, more security and capacity. Now, I know the Honourable Member for South Suffolk is a keen supporter of DSR, and I think I asked officials when I was coming to actually see an example of that, because I think how we use the electricity efficiently, how we reduce demand is as important as how we cater for demand at other times. And I'd urge honourable members to look at the example of Excel, the big London exhibition site that use Flexicity, who have a genuinely good case model of how they use diesel generators to switch on and off demand when required, but at the same time how Flexicity can effectively remotely control some of the generation and reduce waste onto the grid. And I think that is something that we hopefully should see more of. And I've certainly heard loud and clear, and so has the Department, the Honourable Member for South Suffolk's a recommendation and enthusiasm for DSR, and I hope that is given more prominent role in the next few years. The levy control framework, this is the second debate I have been here. Sometimes one of the other ministers might get home to find their locks have changed in their offices. But this is the second debate I've been here where the demand from colleagues and members of this House for clear indication for a future levy control framework is required. And we hear that urgency. And it's not a comfort, but with 19 days to go, I can anticipate that the Secretary of State will not be revealing anytime soon, but certainly in the near future, we recognise that urgency, and I think we'll all be working, whoever is in government, to make sure that that long-term indication is there. And I hear with open heart and open mind the recommendation of a sort of rolling 7-year framework to make sure we update that. It certainly, from my personal point of view, would help reflect advances in technologies as they develop. If you can understand impacts technologies have as you roll through, you may therefore understand how much you need, how much influence it will have on levies and everything else. On the subject of renewables, there is obviously a long list of renewables that we can talk about, and it's clear from the CFDs that the government has been happy and encouraging of offshore wind farm developments, and we've seen that. We hear the fears about a high strike price of offshore, the expense of offshore. But what the CFD auction has shown is the direction is downward. It has shown that as these technologies develop, as competition is brought in, that we are starting to reduce that price. And I hope in the medium term to long term that they will converge to be near enough, not so different from onshore. Onshore, the government is committed to onshore as a way of obviously generating energy. I think we are at a stage where many of us who have these applications in our constituencies should be saying and can say, and I think the government has shown with its record of where it chooses not to support an onshore farm, is that investors should think very carefully about whether they are bringing a well-sited, well-researched location to planning and to application, or whether they are indulging in speculative, lazy applications that some of us all see in our constituencies, where out of the blue some sort of more of a speculative application happens, and that is often where constituents get upset and are surprised, and it comes without any indication of logic or anything else. And I think in those cases the message should be loud and clear that do your research, do your work, make sure this is not speculative and you're really just trying to garner profit for profit's sake rather than fit in to that community. Solar. The government, I think the biggest drop in price has been in the CFD auction. It was the 58% drop from solar. And the government does support solar at all levels, whether it's below the 5 megawatt and the feed-in tariffs. And it's been encouraging to see how the solar industry has been imaginative in how it can find new areas, whether it's renting roofs from large areas, to find a sort of site for it to get the sun and use that. And the government is certainly committed in the long term to ensure that solar is part of that mix, and it wants it to be successful. And I hope to see more bids in the next CFD round. When it comes to shale gas, that is a subject.
Is he as frustrated as I am, and I'm not making a partisan point here, of the lack of development of commercial scale marine energy? I mean, we've got a lot of good demonstrations that haven't moved forward to that. And what does he think? What more can be done to make that happen? Because everybody agrees about the potential of wave tide energy, but it's not gone to that scale. And since I've been in this house and interested in energy from day one, it's always been 3 or 4 years hence, and it hasn't happened. So what does he think can be done so that we can get good commercial projects up and running to move the way, to get that predictable energy requirement that we need?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for that question, because like him, I remember the grander schemes, the Severn Barrage, and in my constituency we had the Wyre Barrage, and quite large-scale, ambitious schemes. And it is certainly, and I checked before I came here, it is one of the department's priorities is the Swansea Lagoon Barrage. And I think the first step, it is a departmental priority. If we can get that successful, we can get that up and running, I think those are the sort of things that then trigger very quickly a rollout elsewhere. And I think that, as you say, it has always been just over the horizon, as long as I've ever been involved in wave and tidal issues. But I think we're getting to a stage where the scale is right. It's not over-ambitious, I think. And from what I can tell in Swansea, I think local business is in favour of it. People locally are supportive of it. And so I think what we should all do is try and help that to become a reality and then sing its praises, should it be so, far and wide.
The Swansea debate is something I do fully support. But we've had in my area, where there's good tidal flow, that we've had the demonstration, we've had it working in Strangford Lough, marine current turbines and Siemens. And it was Siemens itself that didn't take it to the next stage. And the government had done what it can. There is good renewable obligations and support for it in Scotland and in other places. It just hasn't done. So I understand what he says about scale, but this wasn't a large-scale project. This could have developed in sections and become a very good, but it's something missing from it. And I wonder if you take that back so that we can move forward with tidal energy.
What I'm very happy to... But I'm very happy to find out, or ask the department to find out, what its observations were about why Siemens did not choose to go forward. And I think we can learn from that, and whether it was a commercial decision, whether it was internal conflict of interest decision that they actually wanted to focus on another technology would be certainly good to learn and to go forward. On shale gas, I am a Member of Parliament whose constituency is in Lancashire. It borders on the two current shale gas sites. And I want to place on record the government's position. The government is absolutely clear that it is not determined to rush for gas. It is not determined to throw everything out just to get fracking going. The government is in favour of fracking, but it wants to be the arbitrator of it. It wants to listen to the science behind it. It doesn't want to be in the pocket of the oil or gas companies. It doesn't want to be in the pocket of the green movement. Its role is to make sure that, with a pragmatic approach, that shale gas proceeds, learning all the experiences from around the world, learning all the environmental studies and the environmental impacts that have happened, and use its position to make sure that we set a gold standard, that we move forward where we can, mitigating impacts on local communities through sovereign wealth funds and local community funding, but also on planning things that mineral rights authorities can place, that shale gas is something that will and have to be at some stage in the mix. I would rather buy my gas from Britain than I would from Mr. Putin. So if you have objections on human rights, there is one thing. I would rather be not compressing gas in big ships and taking it around the sea if it is possible to get it from Britain. But the government's position is not to be just sort of recklessly progressing on shale gas at any cost. And it is often painted by the opponents of it as if it is true, the rush for gas. That is not the case. And we, as we saw in the recent infrastructure bill debate, we accepted some of the amendments that were put forward by the opposition, and we will certainly work to make sure that the industry is safe, that constituents do not have impacts unnecessarily put on them, and that we all benefit from that process. I think really the last part of which the Honourable Member from Rutherglen mentioned was obviously carbon storage capture. And I think that's right. You can't avoid the fact that will be part of an ability that we have to invest in develop, and complement how we generate our energy in the next 20, 30, 40 years. We can't just pretend that it is, a tokenistic thing. It is going to be a fact. We need to invest in it. The government is doing what it can to help invest with the process. And I, a bit like some of the barrage and the tidal thing, I look forward to the day when we start the very first process of getting it, the pipelines and everything else in place. And I think whoever is in government, it is worth monitoring that and investing in it as well. I hope that colleagues have felt that the debate today has, in a sense, cemented the view of the current MG policy being in the right direction for this country, reducing carbon emissions, encouraging different technologies, and getting value for money for the bill payer. Because we can't pretend that those two issues, they have to be hand in hand. We have to carry with us the public if we are going to develop this successfully. And therefore, I think we should be not pleased, but we should be happy that at the moment that the CFD proved that these things are going in the right direction. The economic benefits are clear as well. Since 2010, we estimate over £30 billion has been invested in electricity generation, and principally in renewable technologies. In previous years, they may not have gone, but it's principally gone on there. £30 billion doesn't grow on trees. And if we can't get it from the markets and the private sector, you will in the end have to get it from the taxpayer. And I think it is a good thing that we have helped not only change government policy, but also changed, I suppose, investment policy in this country and investor thinking. But I am very grateful, certainly as someone who came to some extent late to the energy debate, for the work of the Select Committee and its reports. I find them incredibly educational, and I think I know that the department finds them very, very useful in helping shape and create a new policy in the years to come. And so, just before finishing, I'd like to repeat my tribute to the member for South Suffolk. Thank you for his work, and thank you for his work to this House as well.
Tim Yeo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I carry everyone here with me when I say what an excellent debate this was, with exceptionally high-quality contributions. I don't expect to be challenged on that verdict. Numbers taking part may have been small, but the quality could not have been higher, as one would expect, since I've debated all these issues with exactly the same honourable members on more than one occasion in the past. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his very generous comments about my committee and its work, and about my personal contribution to the discussions on these issues over a number of years. That's very much appreciated. It's quite likely is the last time I'll speak in Westminster Hall. I can't say that I have great regrets about only having 19 sitting days left, and perhaps I ought to apologise to my honourable friend who's also my whip. I think I may have missed a division last night. And so the opportunity for doing that is diminishing very quickly. I think that's the first time I ever used a debate to acknowledge that. It is very important, though, as I think all those taking part have said, that we do try and approach these issues in a long-term, bipartisan, and often consensual way. It doesn't mean to say there can't be vigorous debate and disagreement, but we need to achieve in an industry where you make a decision now, the effects of which are going to be felt not in 10 years, but 30, 40, 50, even 60 years' time, that we really work hard to get the right answers. And the work of my committee has been consistently driven, I think, firstly, by our preference to act in a constructive way, but secondly, to look at the evidence first. It is very much an evidence-driven committee. And that, I hope, will continue. I'm sure it will continue in the next Parliament. I do think that it is important that we should maintain the cross-party consensus about the importance of tackling climate change above all. That is the central issue for policymakers in the 21st century. It will transcend all sorts of anxieties right now on the security front. But the truth is that the prosperity of the human species is directly threatened by dangerous and irreversible climate change, and therefore actions which we take will affect generations unborn for centuries to come. And as the honourable member for Rutherford and Rutherglen and Hamilton West mentioned, there has been a slight erosion of the consensus about the science of climate change, particularly, I think, on my side. But I do, nevertheless, celebrate the fact that there's still a vast majority, I think, in all the political parties, with the exception of UKIP, of the overriding necessity of tackling climate change and of the leading role that Britain has played, and I hope will continue to play, partly because of our strong science base, partly because I think we are very thoughtful in our approach to sustainability issues, and I hope that's maintained. Carbon capture and storage was mentioned, and that was an omission on my part. I was conscious when I was making a few notes this morning that I didn't want to take up too much time. As it happened, there was no shortage of time. But carbon capture and storage is the one technology which the world most urgently needs, in my view. That is the one thing that could transform the economics of fossil fuels. It would allow perhaps some of the reserves of fossil fuels, which at the moment probably will never be utilised, to be utilised. And it therefore is worth giving the most amount of support to it. I'm sometimes frustrated that the private sector is not more enthusiastic about this. Given the resources available to the companies in the fossil fuel industry, I would like to see them championing the cause of research on carbon capture storage more than they are. This should not be left entirely to taxpayers and governments. I'm not saying it is entirely left to them, but there's a lot of the burden is being shouldered by that at the moment. We definitely should prioritise attempts to introduce, to achieve carbon capture and storage on an economically viable basis. And there is a detailed point of great importance about whether we can tweak the way in which we support other low-carbon technologies in a way which will directly incentivise more research into carbon capture and storage. The future of the levy control framework was mentioned several times, and it is very important. I think it's very easy for laymen to overlook the impact which the cost of capital has on consumer prices in an industry as capital intensive as energy. And the cost of capital is directly related to the predictability and stability of policy. Another reason why, as far as possible, achieving a bipartisan consensus is important as well. I won't go down I'm tempted, but won't go down the track about, I can see already know what I'm going to say before I've said it, of whether an energy price freeze is a good way to reduce the cost of capital. I think our respective views on that are well known. But I'm pleased by the fact that talking to investors, I talk to some very big investors on a regular basis, that they are acknowledging that the UK regime, which has evolved over a period of time with a lot of thought from all sides going into it, does now offer quite attractive opportunities. That not just about the fact the rule of law is respected here, but we have got a regime which looks as though it's capable now of sustaining a framework in which long-term investments will be attracted. That will be to the benefit of everyone in the future. I warmly welcome my honourable friend's response on a wide range of issues, including the potential of demand-side response measures. I would just want to reiterate my concern that we should ensure that although obviously bringing in backing up generating capacity at short notice is vital in terms of trimming the peaks and enabling us to get by with a lower overall capacity for generation. That's and an increasing number of people are ready to provide that, including some individuals. But that's part of the story. There is another part where, in my view, in the long term, there's an even greater prize if we can facilitate consumption cuts at short notice. We build into our equipment chips which automatically switch off if they can, air conditioning when the price rises to a certain level and so on. That is another helpful aspect of this, and one which I think we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of its potential. My honourable friend also sounded, I thought, a very measured tone about shale gas, and that's welcome. We've been through a process where when shale gas, when the Daily Mail heard of it, they thought this is the answer to all our problems. Some other people on the perhaps extreme green wing say under no circumstances should we contemplate shale gas in this country, fracking in this country. There is a middle way there, and I hope the government will go down that middle way, whichever government it is. But I do believe that there is also a prize for doing this fairly quickly. I think that there is an opportunity. We're good at writing regulatory systems, or designing them in this country. If we moved ahead during 2015, I think we could shape the whole EU regulatory framework for shale gas. I think other countries might follow, and that would give us benefits in the supply chain. Above all, the final message I want to have is that the future has got to be low carbon for the reasons we understand. It does not in any way need to be low growth. We can have, indeed, I think we are more likely to have a high growth economy if it's also a low carbon economy. That is the way forward for the UK, it's the way forward for the EU, it is the way forward for the world.
The question is that the sitting be now adjourned. Order, order.